Okay, so at this point, I can take questions. I do want to reiterate, it is a work in progress. But
In 2 weeks. People have questions?
I feel like I have like 10 questions.
Okay. How about you take a couple?
Why don't
And see
I,
if somebody
why
else
don't I
wants to.
launch, and then if others have questions, we can go there too. One of the things as I was looking at this report is the tension between having immersion programs that are full school models, like the Richmond Japanese program, versus a neighborhood school where you have a strand of immersion classes and a strand of neighborhood kids in the same building. And there's often a tension, but I think there's also benefits. I don't know, is there a way for you to talk about kind of the challenges and the opportunities presented with the full school model versus the other, or if we're leaning in one way or another? And again, I know you've been on the job for 2 weeks, so.
Well, if you answer your question, that was going to be my question, the idea, what strategies we use to help alleviate that tension maybe? Would that be okay if they answered
Sure.
that too?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm assuming you're talking about in the dual
Yes,
with
yes,
the language.
exactly. That
So-
was my one.
But it's just the question about which models prefer. Do you see a difference in results or community engagement or?
So I think what we've really seen is our ability to implement well affects the results that we have with our students.
Sure.
And so we see differences across our system that we are able to do course corrections for right now. I would also say that one of the challenges that I was actually talking to Mr. Trombley about from Sackett, who was speaking earlier, is around neighborhood school attendance and opportunities to cite programs in communities where you have high native speaking populations, and the difficulty with sustainability of those programs within those neighborhoods, because Portland neighborhoods change over time, and so you see transitioning community groups that may no longer live in that neighborhood. I think Kelly is a good example of a school that has seen a change in who their neighborhood student is, and we have a large population of native Russian-speaking students who now come to Kelly from East County, who were originally living within those neighborhoods. So there's some unpredictability, no matter how good a job we do with this planning around enrollment and transfer. However, it's also one of the things we really need to look at. Ideally, in a dual language program, and what I said earlier about Ms. Armendariz, she could answer any of this, so but we'll just take turns. But ideally, we would really be looking for 50% native English speakers, 50% target language speakers within any program. When you are recruiting in those numbers, sometimes it is difficult within a neighborhood setting to get those numbers at a kindergarten or a first grade level. And so that's when you start talking about transfer policies and how do we make sure that we still have spots available for those native language speakers who may be living in a different neighborhood and who would learn, we know, more in this model if we were able to give them advantage. So we have really worked on that policy over the last year. I think you heard Director Garcia speak to that last year when we were here. As far as neighborhood programs, part of our tension around that is having a big enough dual language program and a big enough neighborhood program to float both. And so we do see that size does matter, and then you're talking about physical plant size as well that begins to matter in recruitment. So I really haven't answered your question except to say that, yeah, there is an existing tension, and the committee has been very aware of that as we've been working together. One of the things we've really been trying to look for is long-term sustainability, looking for what is the value of bilingualism, having conversations around where are we in a global economy as learners, if we are truly creating competitive advantage for our students, that competitive advantage likely does lie in bilingualism. So where are we in that conversation as a district? And that's one that I think everyone on the committee would very willingly have us engage in as we continue to move forward.
There's only one.
Yeah, that was, that, I mean, you
Whoops.
just led me right into the next question, which is, when you looked at when you look at this graph, you see two-way dual immersion, and then you also see the one-way dual immersion, which is typically more English speakers learning to become bilingual. And in both cases, you see pretty incredible results, and I think there's many of us who wish that we could start these programs across the board and from kindergarten on out. What we have chosen to do is to kind of look at our native speakers and really looking at this as a strategy to help support our emerging bilingual students. I was curious when you just mentioned about African American students and that we know they would benefit from this program, and many of those African American students are English speaking students. And so I don't know whether we as a board have considered this as, again, as a strategy for student groups who are native English speakers who aren't as successful. Is this a strategy? Should we be expanding this model to be looking at other population groups that would really benefit from it? I think we know that every student would benefit from it, and if our goal is to have world citizens graduate, or kids who can really truly step into the world as world citizens, you know, we need to get there. So it's more about how you prioritize. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit more about, I think you were maybe looking at citing more programs in traditionally African American neighborhoods as a way to try to attract more students. We think there would be some huge benefits there. Is that what you were getting at?
Well, what the piece of data that interested the committee was the underrepresentation of our African American students in dual language immersion programs. We know that African American students make up 11% of the district, but they're only 2% in the programs. So we know that they are not being able to find equal access into those programs, and we know that they would be high leverage programs for them too. I agree with you. They are dual language immersion programs are programs that benefit all students, and we would definitely want them eventually throughout the entire district. It's a matter of prioritizing, and the committee was prioritizing the expansion to places where we felt we could make an impact on the achievement gap.
Yes.
And that's kind of why we were looking at those, but there's nothing that would keep us from continuing expansion of dual language programs throughout the entire district. Would you like me to do that?
I would, in fact. And in fact, we have a board policy, which I was going to ask about, from I think 2010, where we actually designated 4 high schools around the district. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was Franklin, Roosevelt, Madison, and Lincoln as kind of the high schools that would end up becoming the language immersion high schools. And clearly in most of those high school clusters or regions, we have a couple of immersion programs now feeding in, and you know, certainly in Lincoln we don't have that yet at all. We just have the Ainsworth program. So I don't know if that's also something that the committee is looking at, was that ultimate goal of kind of having regional high school hubs where...
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking at actually from pre-K all the way up to 12th grade and having channels for these students to continue that. As a matter of fact, when we looked at the African American population and where would be some places that we could build on some work that is already being done, there is pre-Ks that currently are teaching Mandarin to their students, and so some of that groundwork has been done. But and that is within the Jefferson cluster. But we're absolutely looking all the way through 12th grade. As Melissa said, you know, student populations move around and then things change, so it becomes difficult to be able to predict. So we want to take our time in figuring out what is the best pathway for today for kindergarten and first, and then have a pathway all the way through 12th. Does that address what you were asking?
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.